history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from this responsibility. I welcome it. I do not believe that any of us would exchange places with any other people or any other generation. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. My
Welcome, folks. I'm back to my absolute bread and butter with Musings of a Cigarette Smoking Man. Come in from the cold, won't you? Find a comfortable chair. The air in here is familiar. A little thick, perhaps, but conductive to thought. This is Musings of a Cigarette Smoking Man, where we don't just observe the world, we dissect it, piece by agonizing piece, under the harsh glare of a truth few are willing to acknowledge. Tonight, we pull back the curtain on geopolitical dramas that's been playing out in the shadows for decades. It's a dance of veiled threats, covert operations, and meticulously crafted narratives. We're talking about the intricate, often perilous relationship between Israel and Iran. Two nations bound by geography, yet separated by an abyss of ideology and ambition. It's a conflict that rarely flares into open warfare, but simmers constantly, a low-grade fever in the body politic of the Middle East. But we're not here merely to rehash the well-trodden paths of conventional analysis. No, our path is a little dustier, a little more inclined to explore the alleys and back rooms where the real decisions are made, where the strings are pulled. This is a space for the contrarian, for the thinker who asks why, when others accept what. We operate on the fringes of acceptable discourse, where questioning the official story isn't just encouraged, it's essential. And in this intricate web of historical animosities and strategic maneuvering, we introduce a new, potentially destabilizing element, the hypothetical 2025 Genius Act, a piece of legislation or perhaps a paradigm shift in how nations approach security and technological advancement. What happens when the old enmities meet the cutting edge of state-sponsored intelligence and control? Does it create a new equilibrium, or does it ignite the tinderbox? We'll be exploring these connections, these subtle yet profound influences. Consider this an invitation to shed the comforting blanket of accepted wisdom and to engage with the uncomfortable, the speculative, the genuinely thought-provoking, because the truth, as you know, is rarely found in the headlines. It's in the silences, in the unanswered questions, in the smoke that lingers long after the fire has died down. So settle in. Light one up if you must, and let the conversation begin. The relationship between Israel and Iran is a tangled knot, isn't it? For decades, it's been a story of whispers and proxy skirmishes, a shadow war fought on the digital battlefields and in the dusty sheets of faraway nations. To understand where we might be going, especially with hypothetical legislative frameworks like the 2025 Genius Act entering the picture, we need to rewind. We need to look at how this animosity truly calcified, how it shifted from a complex, albeit wary understanding to outright hostility. For a time, before the seismic shift of 1979, there was a peculiar détente, even cooperation between Iran under the Shah and Israel. They shared common, albeit unspoken, interests. Both were secular, modernizing states in a region largely dominated by Arab nationalism and Islamic conservatism. Israel saw Iran as a crucial counterweight to its Arab neighbors, a stable pro Western entity. The Shah, for his part, saw Israel as a reliable partner, a bulwark against pan-Arabism, and, increasingly, against the rising tide of Islamic fundamentalism that threatened his own rule. There were economic ties, intelligence sharing, and even covert cooperation on matters of regional security. It wasn't an alliance forged in public, but it was pragmatic understanding born of shared geopolitical anxieties. Then came the revolution. The Ayatollah Khomeini's return in 1979 wasn't just an internal Iranian affair, it was a geopolitical earthquake. The Shah was out, and with him the secular westward-leaning regime that Israel had quietly relied upon. Khomeini, fueled by a potent blend of anti-Western sentiment and revolutionary Shia Islam, wasted no time in severing these ties. Israel, once a quiet partner, was now declared the little Satan, an illegitimate entity to be expelled from the region, while the United States was the great Satan. The West, this wasn't just rhetoric, it was fundamental reordering of Iran's foreign policy, a complete inversion of its previous strategic orientation. The shift was dramatic and immediate. The strategic calculus of the Middle East was fundamentally altered. What followed was not an immediate declaration of all out war, but a slow, insidious buildup of mutual suspicion and reliance on indirect means of confrontation. This is where the concept of the shadow war truly takes root. Both nations possess the capabilities and the perceived necessity to avoid direct confrontation while still pursuing their objectives and undermining their adversary. Key flashpoints began to emerge, not necessarily in direct military clashes, but in the broader regional conflicts that became proxy battlegrounds. The Iran-Iraq War, 1980 to 1988, is a prime example. Though the dynamics here are complex, Israel, while not directly intervening in favor of Iraq, certainly did not mourn Saddam Hussein's efforts to bleed Iran dry. Some historical accounts suggest discreet Israeli military aid and intelligence were provided to Iran during certain phases of the war. It's a pragmatic, if morally ambiguous move to keep its primary adversary weakened. This illustrates the cynical pragmatism that often underpins statecraft, a willingness to engage with the enemy of your enemy, even if that enemy is also your primary antagonist. Following the Iran-Iraq War, Iran began to cultivate and support various regional militias and political movements, most notably Hezbollah in Lebanon. For Israel, Hezbollah became a persistent thorn in its side, a highly effective proxy force capable of launching attacks and engaging Israeli forces, particularly in southern Lebanon. This became a central arena for their indirect conflict. Israel's incursions into Lebanon, the ongoing tensions along the Israeli Lebanese border, and the cyclical escalations with Hezbollah are all deeply intertwined with this long standing Iran Israel animosity. Iran, through its support for Hezbollah, was able to project power and exert pressure on Israel without ever engaging Israeli forces directly on the battlefield. Intelligence operations became a crucial and often clandestine dimension of its rivalry. Both nations developed sophisticated intelligence agencies, Mossad for Israel and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, intelligence apparatus for Iran, dedicated to undermining the other. This included espionage, the recruitment of agents, and more controversially, targeted assassinations and sabotage operations. Numerous Iranian scientists involved in nuclear and missile programs have been assassinated, with many Western intelligence assessments pointing the finger at Israel. Similarly, Iran has been accused of orchestrating terrorist attacks against Israeli targets abroad and supporting militant groups that pose a threat to Israeli security. These actions, while rarely acknowledged officially, form a significant part of the ongoing shadow war, quote unquote, a constant low level conflict waged through deniable means. The differing ideologies and strategic objectives are stark. Israel, from its inception, has operated under a perpetual security doctrine, viewing itself as an island of stability in a volatile region, constantly under existential threat. Its strategic objective has been survival, security, and the establishment of secure borders, often necessitating preemptive actions and a willingness to project power. Iran, on the other hand, under the Islamic Republic, has espoused a revolutionary ideology seeking to export its Shia Islamic model, undermine Western influence in the region, and challenge the existing regional order, which it sees as dominated by the U.S. and its allies, including Israel. Iran's strategic objective is to become the preeminent regional power, a position it believes is its natural right and a necessary step to achieving its ideological goals. Regional power dynamics and the involvement of external actors have further complicated and exacerbated this rivalry. The United States, as Israel's primary ally, has often found itself in opposition to Iran's regional ambitions. This alignment has, at times, placed Israel and the U.S. in similar strategic corner concerning Iran. Conversely, Iran has sought to cultivate relationships with powers that oppose U.S. and Israeli influence, such as Syria and various non-state actors. The complex geopolitical landscape in the Middle East, with its shifting alliances and external interventions, has provided fertile ground for the Israel-Iran rivalry to fester and manifest in various proxy conflicts, from the civil war in Syria to the ongoing instability in Yemen. Consider the current landscape. Iran's increased involvement in Syria, supporting the Assad regime, directly clashes with Israeli interests, which views Iranian entrenchment in its northern neighbor as a direct threat to its security. Israel has conducted numerous airstrikes against Iranian-linked targets in Syria, a clear manifestation of this ongoing shadow war. Similarly, Iran's support for Houthi rebels in Yemen, while seemingly distant, is seen by some analysts as another front in its broader strategy to challenge Saudi Arabia and, by extension, undermine broader U.S. aligned regional security architectures that Israel benefits from. The cynicism, of course, comes in observing how these events are often framed. The narrative presented to the public is rarely the full picture. Instead, we get simplified tales of good versus evil, of necessary interventions and defensive postures. But beneath the surface is a complex interplay of national interests, ideological drivers, and strategic calculations, often conducted in the realm of the deniable. It's a history of animosity, yes, but also a history of pragmatic, albeit ruthless, maneuvering, a testament to the enduring nature of statecraft conducted in the shadows. The nuclear question, Iran's program, and Israel's concerns. Now let's pivot. We've discussed the historical animosity, the shadow war, the proxy skirmishes, but lurking beneath all of that, a constant specter, a potential game changer that informs so much of the regional dynamic is the nuclear question, specifically Iran's nuclear program. For Israel, this isn't just another geopolitical issue, it's an existential one. For Iran, it's a matter of national sovereignty, deterrence, and perhaps regional prestige. Iran's official stance, repeated ad nauseum, is that its nuclear program is purely for peaceful purposes, energy generation, medical isotopes, that sort of thing. And in theory, that's entirely plausible. Many nations pursue nuclear technology for civilian use. The International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, has been involved, monitoring facilities, conducting inspections, but the West, and particularly Israel, views this with a healthy dose of skepticism, bordering on outright disbelief. The underlying fear, the deep seated conviction, is that Iran isn't just aiming for a power plant, it's aiming for a bomb. Why this distrust? Several factors feed into it. Iran's history of clandestine nuclear activities, uncovered by intelligence agencies, certainly doesn't help. Sites like Natanz and Fordo, built in secret, raise significant red flags. Then there is rhetoric emanating from Tehran, particularly from certain hardline factions and the supreme leader, who have at times spoken about the theological or strategic permissibility of nuclear weapons, even while officially denying any pursuit. This ambiguity, this dual messaging, fuels the suspicion that the peaceful pronouncements are a smokescreen for a weapons program. The international community, led by the U.S. and European powers, attempted to contain this perceived threat through diplomacy, most notably the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, signed in 2015. The deal was an attempt to strike a bargain. Iran would significantly curb its uranium enrichment activities, dismantle key parts of its nuclear infrastructure, and allow enhanced inspections in exchange for sanctions relief. It was a complex, controversial agreement hailed by supporters as a vital step to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons and decried by critics as too lenient, not robust enough, and ultimately temporary. And like many such grand diplomatic gestures, it unraveled. The U.S., under the Trump administration, unilaterally withdrew from the JCPOA in 2018, arguing that it was a quote unquote terrible deal that didn't go far enough. This withdrawal, coupled with the reimposition of crippling economic sanctions, ushered in an era of maximum pressure. Iran, feeling betrayed and economically squeezed, responded by gradually exceeding the limits set by JPOA, enriching uranium to higher levels and expanding its nuclear activities. The deal, in essence, died a slow, agonizing death, leaving the situation more volatile than before. Now, what are the strategic implications for Israel if Iran were to acquire a nuclear capability? The answer, in short, is cataclysmic. Israel views itself as a small nation in a hostile region, surrounded by states and non state actors that have, at various times, called for its destruction. Its security doctrine is built on deterrence, on maintaining and on ensuring that no regional power can pose an existential threat. The idea of a nuclear armed Iran, a state that publicly calls for Israel's annihilation, fundamentally upends this calculus. It would shatter the regional balance of power, potentially triggering a nuclear arms race with other nations in the Middle East feeling compelled to acquire their own nuclear deterrence. Israel's historical stance on nuclear proliferation in the region is clear. It has consistently sought to prevent any Arab state or Iran from developing nuclear weapons. This policy has been buttressed by its unwidely acknowledged but undeclared nuclear arsenal. Israel has never officially confirmed nor denied possessing nuclear weapons, adhering to a policy of nuclear ambiguity. This strategy is intended to deter potential adversaries without provoking a regional arms race, a delicate balancing act. However, this policy means that Israel's own nuclear status is a constant unspoken factor in regional security discussions and a source of hypocrisy in the eyes of some international observers when discussing Iran's program. Intel assessments on Iran's nuclear program are, as you might expect, a murky business. Various agencies, including those of the U.S., in Israel have produced reports, some publicly available, others classified. These reports often provide differing timelines and confidence levels regarding Iran's intent and capability. There have been moments where intelligence suggested Iran was close to weaponization, and other times where assessments indicated it was not actively pursuing a weapon. Dissenting opinions within communities are not uncommon as analysts grapple with incomplete data, deception by the target nation, and the inherent political pressures of interpreting sensitive information. The potential for miscalculation is enormous. A premature strike based on flawed intelligence could ignite a devastating regional war. Conversely, inaction based on overly optimistic assessments could lead to a far worse outcome down the line. The narrative surrounding Iran's nuclear program is deeply entwined with the broader geopolitical struggles. For Israel, it's about survival. For Iran, it's about deterrence, regional influence, and potentially a retribution for past grievances. The failure of the JCPOA and the subsequent escalation have brought the region to a precarious point. The 2025 Genius Act or any similarly legislative framework aimed at managing advanced technologies or national security would have to contend with this deeply entrenched nuclear standoff. Such an act such Could such an act offer a new path, or would it simply become another tool in the existing arsenal of pressure and counterpressure? The question remains open, hanging in the air, much like the lingering smoke from a long extinguished cigarette. We've laid the groundwork. We've traced the historical animosities between Israel and Iran, those intricate tendrils of proxy wars, intel games, and the ever present specter of nuclear ambition. It's a landscape painted in shades of gray, where national interests clash with ideological divides run deep. But what if this familiar, albeit volatile dynamic were to be thrust into a new dimension? What if a radical piece of legislation, a hypothetical blueprint for the future, were to emerge from the halls of power, promising to reshape not just national security, but the very fabric of state control and individual liberty. Enter, if you will, the 2025 Genius Act. Now, this is not a piece of legislation you'll find debated on cable news, nor one that's currently etched into any statutory law. Consider it a thought experiment, a speculative seed planted in the fertile ground of our collective anxieties about the future. What could such an act represent? The name itself is suggestive, isn't it? Genius. It simply implies intelligence, foresight, perhaps a touch of hubris. But whose genius and to what end? From a libertarian countercultural perspective, such a piece of legislation immediately triggers a cascade of questions, primarily centered around its potential to expand state power and diminish individual autonomy. Let's brainstorm. Could the 2025 Genius Act be a legislative push towards advanced artificial intelligence integration into national security um, apparatuses? Imagine AI driven surveillance systems that go far beyond current capabilities, capable of predicting dissent, identifying potential threats based on algorithmic analysis of behavior, communication, and even biometric data. This could manifest as a vast interconnected network of sensors and data processors managed by increasingly sophisticated AI, ostensibly for the purpose of preempting conflict or crime, but in reality, creating an unprecedented infrastructure for mass surveillance and social engineering. Or perhaps it's a more direct approach to societal control. The genius in the act could refer to the genetic predisposition for cognitive manipulation. Picture legislation that mandates or incentivizes genetic screening for undesirable traits, or promotes sophisticated neurolinguistic programming techniques embedded within public media or communication networks. The goal? To foster a more compliant, less questioning populace, a society where inherent genius, as defined by the state, is cultivated, a deviation is discouraged or even pathologized. The implications for individual freedom, for the very concept of free will, are chilling. Another avenue to consider is economic restructuring. Could the 2025 Genius Act be a legislative framework designed to consolidate economic power, perhaps through leveraging advanced technologies like blockchain, or perhaps through or quantum computing, ostensibly to create more efficient markets, but in practice to concentrate wealth and control in the hands of a select few or the state itself? We're talking about mechanisms that could enable unprecedented control over financial transactions, supply chains, and even individual access to resources, all under the guise of progress and efficiency. And then there's the truly esoteric. What if the Genius Act isn't about overt control, but something far more subtle and pervasive? Perhaps it relates to the management of information, the curation of reality itself. Imagine legislation that grants unprecedented authority to state sponsored entities to shape public discourse, to define what constitutes truth, and to algorithmically filter the information available to citizens. This can be framed as combating misinformation, but the libertarian interpretation immediately flags it as a tool for propaganda and intellectual suppression. The core question for us is why such an act would be conceived. What societal or geopolitical pressures would necessitate such drastic legislative measures? What perceived threats, real or manufactured, would justify the expansion of state power to these potentially extreme levels? This is where the countercultural lens is crucial. We don't accept the stated justifications at face value. We look for the underlying motivations, the hidden agendas, the beneficiaries of such a system. Now let's collect this hypothetical 2025 Genius Act to the geopolitical tensions we've been exploring, Israel and Iran. How might such an act, regardless of its specific manifestation, impact this complex relationship? The possibilities are as varied as they are potentially alarming. Consider a scenario where the Genius Act is primarily focused on advanced technological control and surveillance. If such capabilities are deployed by, say, the United States or other global powers, it could create a new layer of geopolitical maneuvering. Nations might engage in technological arms races, not just in conventional weapons, but sophisticated AI, cyber warfare capabilities, and data control. This could dramatically escalate tensions between blocs of nations. Iran, already under sanctions and facing pressure, might feel compelled to develop its own equivalent capabilities, potentially leading to even more opaque and dangerous digital battlefield. Alternatively, if the Genius Act were to be implemented in a way that fostered a greater global cooperation on technological standards or security protocols, A less likely but not entirely impossible interpretation, it could theoretically lead to new, albeit fragile alliances. However, given the inherent tendencies of state power, such cooperation would likely be superficial, masking deeper rivalries and attempts to gain strategic advantage. Israel, with its advanced technological sector, might find itself in a position to leverage such an act to its advantage, perhaps in intelligence sharing or joint technological development, potentially strengthening its regional position. Conversely, Iran might view such a global technological integration as a threat, a means by which its adversaries could exert a greater control and influence over its internal affairs and its regional strategy. What if the Genius Act is designed to manage or control the proliferation of advanced technologies, including those related to nuclear programs? This would place it directly at the heart of the Iran-Israel dynamic. Legislation aimed at enforcing non-proliferation through sophisticated technological means, perhaps advanced monitoring, AI-driven verification systems, or even preemptive cyber interventions, could either de-escalate tensions by providing verifiable controls or dramatically escalate them by being perceived as intrusive offensive weapons. Israel, with its deep seated concerns about Iran's nuclear ambitions, would likely be a key player in advocating for or reacting to such provisions. Iran, on the other hand, might see any such act as a direct assault on its sovereignty and its perceived right to develop its own defense capabilities, leading to defiance and countermeasures. The very nature of this Genius Act could fundamentally alter the nature of state power. If it's about enhanced surveillance and predictive control, it shifts the balance from reactive defense to proactive preemptive action, blurring the lines between legitimate security measures and oppressive control. In the context of Israel and Iran, this could mean states becoming even more aggressive in their pursuit of perceived threats, acting on algorithmic probabilities rather than concrete evidence, leading to a higher risk of miscalculation and unintended escalation. The human element, the nuanced diplomacy, the careful calibration of deterrence, all could be potentially sidelined by the cold logic of algorithms and predictive analytics. The why behind such a hypothetical act is perhaps the most crucial element to interrogate. Is, is it a genuine, albeit misguided, attempt to secure a more stable future, or is it a cleverly disguised mechanism for consolidating power, for establishing a new order where control trumps freedom? From our vantage point, the libertarian impulse is to be deeply suspicious of any legislation that claims to hold the key to genius or universal solutions, especially when it involves the machinery of the state. Such acts often serve to legitimize the expansion of governmental reach, to normalize intrusive technologies, and to create dependencies that are difficult to break. The introduction of a 2025 Genius Act, therefore, acts as a potential catalyst not just for technological advancement or societal change, but for a fundamental reevaluation of the geopolitical landscape. It forces us to consider how nascent or future legislative frameworks might interact with existing long-standing conflicts, amplifying their dangers or perhaps, in some convoluted way, forcing a new kind of equilibrium. It's a provocative notion, one that demands we look beyond the immediate headlines and consider the deeper currents of power, control, and human freedom that shape our world. Synergies and conflicts, Israel, Iran, and the Genius Act's impact. We've dissected the historical currents, the nuclear anxieties, and the speculative contours of this hypothetical 2025 Genius Act. Now let's bring these threads together. How do the deep-seated rivalries of Israel and Iran intersect with and potentially get reshaped by a piece of legislation that promises or threatens to redefine the very nature of statecraft and societal control? This isn't just about adding another variable to an already complex equation. It's about considering how this new variable might fundamentally alter the equation itself. Let's posit a core function for our Genius Act: the systematic integration of advanced AI and data analytics into national security operations, with a mandate for predictive threat assessment and preemptive intervention. On the surface, this sounds like a logical progression for any state seeking to maintain dominance or security in an increasingly volatile world. But for nations like Israel and Iran, already locked in protracted shadow war, such an act could have profoundly synergistic and conversely conflicting implications. For Israel, a nation whose national security doctrine is inherently proactive and technologically sophisticated, the Genius Act could represent an unprecedented force multiplier, Imagine Israeli intelligence agencies leveraging AI capable of analyzing global communication patterns, financial transactions, and even social media sentiment to identify and neutralize potential threats originating from Iran or its proxies. This could manifest as highly targeted cyber operations, disruptions of illicit financial networks supporting groups like Hezbollah, or even the preemptive disruption of perceived nuclear proliferation activities. The ability to predict and neutralize threats before they fully materialize aligns perfectly with Israel's long-standing security imperatives. This Genius Act is this interpretation becomes a tool to amplify Israel's existing asymmetric advantages, potentially allowing it to prosecute the shadow war with even greater efficiency and deniability. Conversely, Iran might be such a technologically advanced AI-driven national security framework with immense suspicion as a direct existential threat. If the Genius Act grants its proponents capabilities for deep surveillance and predictive analysis, it can be perceived by Iran as a sophisticated means for its adversaries, primarily Israel and its allies, to infiltrate, monitor, and disrupt its internal stability and regional operations. Iran's strategic response might involve a desperate effort to develop its own counter-genius capabilities, leading to an accelerated or even more dangerous arms race in the realm of cyber warfare and artificial intelligence. This could exacerbate existing tensions, pushing both nations towards more aggressive, preemptive postures based on algorithmic probabilities rather than verifiable intelligence, significantly increasing the risk of miscalculation. Consider the nuclear dimension. If the 2025 Genius Act includes provisions for advanced monitoring and verification technologies, particularly those leveraged for AI detecting clandestine nuclear activities, it could directly target Iran's perceived ambitions. Israel has already deeply been concerned about Iran's nuclear program, would likely champion such provisions, viewing them as essential for regional stability. Iran, however, would almost certainly perceive any such intrusive technological oversight as a violation of its sovereignty and a direct impediment to its strategic objectives. This could lead to Iran attempting to circumvent or actively sabotage these monitoring mechanisms, potentially escalating the conflict. For instance, Iran might accelerate its efforts to disperse nuclear related facilities, embed them in hardened or underground locations, or develop countermeasures specifically designed to defeat AI driven surveillance, thereby creating new flashpoints and challenging the very efficacy of the Genius Act itself. Proxy conflicts, already a hallmark of the Israel Iran rivalry, could also be significantly impacted if the Genius Act enhances a nation's ability to track and disrupt the flow of resources, personnel, and weaponry to proxy groups. It could alter the dynamics on battlefields from Lebanon to Syria. Israel might use these new capabilities to more effectively curtail Iranian support for Hezbollah or other militant organizations, potentially diminishing their operational capacity. Iran, in turn, might seek to leverage its own burgeoning technological capabilities, perhaps through unconventional means or by exploiting vulnerabilities within the Genius Act framework, to maintain its regional influence and support its allies. The shadow war could become even more technologically intricate, with AI-driven intelligence gathering and counterintelligence operations becoming central to success in these proxy arenas. The potential for escalation is a significant concern. When nations possess or perceive their adversaries to possess advanced predictive capabilities, the incentive is to strike first, based on a calculated risk assessment of future threats, increases dramatically. If the Genius Act provides, or is perceived to provide, a decisive technological edge, it could tempt a nation facing what it deems an existential threat, such as Israel concerning Iran's nuclear program, to consider preemptive military action. Conversely, Iran, feeling cornered by such advanced surveillance and disruption capabilities, might accelerate its own risky strategic decisions, perhaps pushing closer to a nuclear weapon threshold as a deterrent or engaging in more aggressive retaliatory actions against perceived aggressors. Furthermore, the implementation of a Genius Act could redefine the very concept of the shadow war. Instead of relying solely on human intelligence, covert operations, and traditional espionage, the conflict could shift towards battles waged in the digital ether through sophisticated AI algorithms and complex data warfare. This might take the conflict even less visible to the public eye, yet potentially more consequential. The stakes involved would be elevated not just by the destructive potential of conventional or nuclear weapons, but by the ability of states to control information, manipulate perception, and predetermine outcomes through technological means. For both Israel and Iran, mastering this new technological dimension of conflict would be paramount. From a libertarian viewpoint, the most alarming aspect of such intersection lies in the potential for the Genius Act to legitimize and expand state surveillance and control under the guise of addressing geopolitical threats. The very justification for such invasive measures, the perceived danger posed by Iran, or Iran's perception of Israeli aggression, could be used to erode individual liberties on a massive scale. If freedom is sacrificed at the altar of national security, that security is increasingly defined by opaque algorithms and state-controlled data, then the Genius Act becomes not a tool for progress, but a mechanism for unprecedented authoritarianism, a synergistic fusion of geopolitical tension and technological oppression. The challenge, then, is to recognize how such legislative frameworks, whether real or imagined, do not exist in a vacuum. They interact with existing power structures, historical grievances, and strategic imperatives. The relationship between Israel and Iran, a complex tapestry woven from decades of distrust and proxy conflict, would undoubtedly be the primary arena where the true nature and impact of the 2025 Genius Act would be tested, revealing whether it leads to a more stable, albeit heavily managed, order or to an even more perilous escalation in the shadows. The currents of geopolitics and the machinations of statecraft we discuss, they require a certain clarity of thought, a means to capture those fleeting insights, those connections others miss. For that, you need tools that are reliable as they are unpretentious. Take, for instance, the Skillcraft U.S. government pen, built to withstand scrutiny, designed for functionality. Whether you're jotting down a critical observation on a clandestine document or simply signing your ration sugar, this pen performs. It's a piece of history, a testament to bureaucratic endurance, and frankly, it writes damn smoothly. No fuss, no frills, just pure unadulterated utility. And where do you commit those thoughts, those incisive critiques of the prevailing narrative? In a moleskin notebook, naturally, the classic, the unassuming repository of brilliance, or perhaps just the day's existential dread. For real. Its pages are a refuge for ideas that refuse to be confined by digital ephemera. Think of it as your personal archive of dissent, a tangible counterpoint to the ephemeral cloud, perfect for mapping out alternative futures, or just remembering where you left your keys in this increasingly confusing world. Now, if these musings resonate, if you find yourself nodding along, recognizing the subtle currents of control and the quiet resistance the individual, you owe it yourself to explore further. Dive deeper into the unconventional, the countercultural, or unapologetically libertarian. Visit Stephen Lake Radio at stephenlake.com. It's a digital sanctuary for those who question, those who analyze, and those who understand that most important battles are often fought in the arena of ideas. Find the resources, the conversations, and the mindset that fuels this entire thing. Don't just listen, engage at stephenlake.com. Beyond the headlines, unseen forces and alternative narratives. We've charted the historical animosities, the nuclear shadows, and the speculative architecture of the 2025 Genius Act. We've looked at the stated positions, the public pronouncements, and the predictable narratives spun by those who manage the grand illusions of statecraft. But you and I, we're not content with the surface, are we? The real story, the one that whispers in the corridors of power and echoes in the spaces between official statements, is rarely found in the carefully curated news cycles. It resides in the unseen forces, the alternative narratives, the subtle manipulations that shape our understanding of the world. Think about the think tanks as well-funded incubators of policy. Officially, they're bastions of objective research, providing data-driven insights to guide governmental action. But peel back the veneer, and you'll often find intricate webs of influence. Corporate interests, defense contractors, foreign governments, all have a vested interest in shaping the intellectual output of these institutions. The conclusions they reach, the policy recommendations they champion, are rarely purely academic. They are, more often than not, the meticulously crafted justifications for preordained actions designed to serve specific agendas, cloaked in the language of national interest. Consider the notion of national interest itself. It's a powerful phrase, a trump card played in every geopolitical debate, but who defines it? Who truly benefits when tensions between Israel and Iran are maintained or even escalated? It's the average citizen concerned with local issues, economic stability, and personal liberty. Or is it the defense industry, profiting from ongoing conflict and the demand for advanced weaponry? Is it the intelligence apparatus, justifying its vast budgets and expanded reach by pointing to perpetual threats? Or perhaps it's the political class, using external conflicts to distract from internal failings or to consolidate power through appeals to patriotism and security? The cynical libertarian in me always suspects the latter three, and rarely the first. The complexity of the Israel Iran dynamic is a perfect canvas for these unseen forces. Decades of covert actions, proxy skirmishes, and intelligence operations create a fertile ground for plausible deniability and manufactured consent. When an Iranian nuclear scientist is assassinated, or an Israeli cyber attack disrupts Iranian infrastructure, the public is fed a simple narrative of action and reaction, of defense and deterrence. But underlying currents and economic incentives for certain geopolitical outcomes, the ideological battles fought in the shadows, the personal ambitions of key players, these are often obscured. The Genius Act, whatever its specific form, could become another tool in this arsenal, a legislative veneer to justify and enable even more sophisticated forms of manipulation and control, all under the banner of progress and security. Let's speculate on the nature of these hidden agendas. Could there be a vested interest in maintaining a certain level of regional instability, or a perpetual low-grade conflict prevents any single power from becoming too dominant, thus preserving a certain balance that benefits external actors, or perhaps allows for the continued flow of arms and influence? The nuclear program, real or perceived, served as a potent justification for continued scrutiny, sanctions, and military posturing, all of which can have significant economic and political ramifications far beyond the immediate region. The Genius Act, with the promise of advanced control and predictive analytics, could be framed as the ultimate solution to managing these unruly elements, but it might just as easily serve to further entrench the very systems that benefit from perpetual tension. We must also consider the role of unintended consequences. Governments, even those with the best laid plans, and let's be generous and assume some good intentions exist somewhere, often unleash forces they cannot control. The introduction of advanced AI into national security, as theorized within the Genius Act, could lead to unforeseen escalations, algorithmic biases creating new forms of discrimination, or even autonomous systems operating outside human oversight. In the hypercharged environment of the Middle East, such unintended consequences could be catastrophic, igniting conflicts that no one truly desired but no one could prevent. The manipulation of public perception is perhaps the most insidious element. By controlling the flow of information, framing events through a specific ideological lens, and employing sophisticated psychological techniques, that a Genius Act might seek to formalize and amplify. Those in power can shape public opinion to align with their objectives. The public might be led to believe that a particular conflict is inevitable, that a certain policy is essential for survival, when in reality, these are manufactured necessities designed to serve a select few. The deep seated historical distrust between Israel and Iran, for instance, can be amplified and weaponized, making it easier to justify actions that might otherwise be met with widespread opposition. Who then truly benefits? This is the multi-million-dollar question, isn't it? If we look beyond the sensational headlines about missile tests and nuclear centrifuges, we might see a more complex picture emerge. The beneficiaries could be the architects of the Genius Act itself, gaining unprecedented power through technological dominance. They could be the industries that supply the surveillance technology, the AI platforms, the cybersecurity infrastructure. They could be political factions that thrive in a climate of fear and external threat. They could even be those who seek to destabilize existing power structures for their own, perhaps less visible gains. The libertarian critique at its core is about questioning authority and demanding transparency. It asks who benefits from this system, what liberties are being curtailed in its name, and are the purported benefits truly worth the cost? When we apply this lens to the Israel Iran dynamic, amplified by the speculative power of the 2025 Genius Act, the questions become even more profound. Is this legislation a genuine attempt to create order, or a sophisticated mechanism to impose control? Does it foster security, or does it merely create new avenues for conflict and oppression? The alternative narrative, the one that questions the official story and seeks out the hidden interest, is not merely an academic exercise. It is perhaps the only path towards preserving genuine freedom in an increasingly managed world. Conclusion: the smoke clears, the question remains. And so we arrive at the inevitable terminus of this particular inquiry. The fog of geopolitics, thick and often disorienting, has been for a brief time illuminated by the stark, perhaps unwelcome light of critical examination. We've navigated the labyrinthine history between Israel and Iran, a relationship forged in suspicion and sustained by a complex interplay of ideology, strategy, and persistent shadow war. We've considered the specter of nuclear ambition, a constant gravitational pull, shaping regional dynamics and the deep-seated anxieties it provokes. Then we've introduced a hypothetical disruptor, the 2025 Genius Act, a legislative phantom, perhaps, one that embodies our deepest concerns about the trajectory of state power in an age of advanced technology. We probed its potential manifestations, from ubiquitous AI surveillance and predictive control to the subtle manipulation of information and economic structures. We examined how such an act, intended or otherwise, could act as a powerful catalyst, synergizing with existing tensions or creating entirely new vectors of conflict between nations like Israel and Iran. The critical takeaway, the enduring message from these musings, is not one of definitive answers. Such things are rare, particularly in the murky world of international relations. Instead, it is a reinforcement of the necessity for persistent questioning. We must constantly scrutinize the narratives presented to us, dissect the motivations behind policy, and challenge the assumptions that underpin the status quo. The libertarian impulse, the countercultural stance, is not about finding easy solutions. It is about demanding transparency, valuing individual liberty above all else, and recognizing that the most effective tools for understanding our world are critical thinking and a healthy dose of skepticism. Did the Genius Act in our hypothetical exploration offer a path towards greater stability, or did it merely refine the instruments of control and conflict? Did it provide genuine security, or did it rationalize the erosion of freedoms in the name of an ever shifting threat landscape? These are questions that resonate beyond the specific case of Israel and Iran, touching upon the very foundations of governance and individual autonomy in the modern era. The unseen forces we discuss, the think tanks, the vested interests, the architects of public perception, continue their work, often shielded by the very complexities we've tried to unravel. The official story, the simplified good versus evil dichotomy, remains the default setting for most. But for those of us who choose to look closer, who dare to question the official pronouncements, the real questions linger. Who truly benefits from perpetual geopolitical tension? What is the cost of security when it comes at the expense of fundamental liberties? And in a world increasingly governed by algorithms and data, where does individual agency truly reside? The smoke may clear, the immediate topic may fade from the headlines, but the questions, the vital and unsettling questions remain. They are the embers that glow in the quiet, urging us to keep digging, to keep questioning, to never accept the world as it is presented, but only as it truly is, or as it could be if we dare to imagine it differently. Thanks for being with me tonight. Until next time, stay vigilant and remember the truth is often found in the spaces between words. I'm the cigarette smoking man. Thanks for hanging out with me tonight. We're going to win.